right. Thank you for allowing me to be here. I guess first and foremost, I'd like to thank Shelley and the staff of the South Dakota State Archives for this opportunity to speak to you today. Not to get too sentimental about this presentation, but it was actually kind of fun to go down memory lane per se, and kind of reflect back on some of the projects that the City Archives and Historic Preservation has been involved with over the past 20 years. Truly, it's amazing to see how the archives and the City Archives have adopted digitization and how this has evolved over the course of time. So, with that being said, why digitize? Well, for the historic preservation in the city of Deadwood, this actually arose out of a need rather than a want. Now, in today's fast-paced society that we live in, time is money, and instant answers is what rules the roost around here. Now, I'm sure many of you who work in collections repositories, whether it's a museum, an archive, a library, or even in a historical society, have collections that sit for any extended amount of period in the back rooms that have never really been touched, but more specifically, they would be warranted for doing digitization. Well, digitization itself is something that's really important, and what we have here is this picture that you see was actually taken 2 weeks ago of a major archival collection that is in the repository, or actually in the receiving room of the City Archives, that was donated in 1998. So you can just kind of see the magnitude. Now, this collection that you see here actually does warrant a digitization project. And so I'm sure many of you have these types of collections in your area. But again, I say, why digitize? Well, for us, every institution is going to be a little bit different. This slide provides 6 reasons why the City of Deadwood needed a digitization project or program for its archival collections. And as you can see, these are pretty straightforward. We're a National Historic Landmark. We have historical significance in the American West, both our legends and our legacy of that. We have 3.4 million people that annually come to the City of Deadwood. That's a hard one to believe, and that's actually coming from our Chamber of Commerce. We're also a national and international tourist destination because of the Black Hills. But this presentation, we're going to focus on the last 2. It's the historic preservation and the city projects that we have that would really require digitization. And number 2, it's the access to genealogical materials. So this type of project, where having a digitization program, just doesn't start overnight. It actually started in stages, and it happened 32 years ago with the beginning of the development of a municipal archive in 1992. Now, I have this picture in here, or this photograph, to kind of show you that historic preservation in the city of Deadwood takes us quite seriously. As I mentioned, if you look in the red, the area on the left shows the 1992 archives, receiving room, and conservation lab. And then not once, but in the last 10 years, twice, we have expanded that to include an archaeological repository and archaeological laboratory, and also an educational area and a display area in the basement of Deadwood City Hall. Now, the big thing that I want to mention is that in 2003, I keep kind of going back to this, we needed to have some sort of goals in mind, obtainable goals, in order to have a digitization program that's going to be beneficial for not just us, but also for what we have today. And what I did was, the City Archives conducted a poll of department heads and city employees to determine what items in the City Archives were the most important to the day-to-day operations. And almost unanimously, the 2 things that came up were architectural plans, which were selected as the top priority for digitization, followed by the Sanborn fire insurance maps. And what I'd like to do is just take a brief moment to kind of discuss these 2 items here. So in perspective, by 2003, 14 years had elapsed from the start of gaming in Deadwood, which was November 1st, 1989. Many of our restorations, infrastructure, and utilities that were installed during the gaming boom were in need of updating and upgrading due to the popularity and the stress caused from the numerous tourists that were coming to Deadwood on an annual basis. Now, food for thought, and this is kind of something that really, when I was going through this, kind of jumped out at me. Food for thought was the fact that prior to starting a digitization program, it was city's policy to basically loan out our architectural plans to contractors, to city employees, anyone that needed the plans, we would just loan those out. And if you look at this photograph on the far left-hand side, you're going to see the daily log or the log book where we were charting what was going out and what was coming back in. And it was in good faith that these items would return back to us in a good working order. Needless to say, looking back, that definitely was the catalyst to try to get a digitization program. So we were not losing our data, and we were not getting things ripped up and shredded, or God knows what else happens on that as well. So, as part of this, we had to educate ourselves, and this came in the way of reading, attending workshops, seminars, and educational opportunities provided by various agencies, including the National Park Service's Conservagram series, which, just for a quick show of hands, how many people are familiar with that? A couple of? All right, excellent. That also included workshops offered by the American Association for State and Local History, more specifically with the Collaborative Digitization Program, and then also local agencies as well, including the South Dakota State Records Advisory Board. They offer workshops, of which Shelley can talk to you some of that later on. But anyways, combined, these provided valuable resources for the best practices at the time and ultimately helped us with the digitization and development policies for our future digitization programs, or projects, excuse me. Now, to date, just so you can kind of get an idea of what we're talking about, we have digitized 890 sets of architectural plans, or more specifically, 10,351 individual sheets of architectural plans. So that's a whole lot of architectural plans that you have there as well. Now, what I'd like to do here real quickly is discuss Sanborn fire insurance maps. Now, just again, as a quick show of hands, how many people are familiar with Sanborn fire insurance maps? Awesome. I can go home. Thank you, guys. You've been a great audience. So, anyways, no, Sanborn fire insurance maps. They were developed by the Sanborn Fire Insurance Company out of New York, and they provided great details on building height, construction materials, entryways, and occupancy. Now, if this is applied to GIS, and that stands for Geographic Information Systems, one can quickly determine the relative age, location, additions, modifications, and a whole other applications just with a few keystrokes on a computer. So the city's Sanborn Fire Insurance Collection consists of 9 sets that span from 1885 to 1948. Now, originally, the Sanborns were down in our downtown core district. However, over by 1903, it expanded into the residential areas as well. Now, one of the more important attributes of GIS is the ability to attach digital-born data, and this can be in the way of tables, spreadsheets, photographs, audio and visual files to spatial locations. Just so you understand how this really works and why this was such an important tool, is that with our GIS system, we have all of the building footprints that have been geo-rectified in, meaning that we know spatially where they're at. Through GIS and through using the Sanborns, we can basically put layer upon layer upon layer, and we can see how things changed. Now, you can kind of see in an archival sense and in a digitization sense why that's so important, because you can attach all these amazing files and things just to one specific area and see how it evolved over time. Now, based on the success of our digitization program with the Sanborn Fire Insurance Maps, Historic Preservation Office adapted and actively incorporated GIS into their daily workflows. It was rather interesting because I had a conversation with Kevin Kuchenbecker, our Historic Preservation Officer, and he said, yeah, Mike, I use the Sanborns almost on a daily basis. I mean, it's that important. It's a wonderful asset and tool. So we began looking for additional programs or projects that could incorporate the archival materials in the city archives into the GIS applications. And this also came in way of the 1993 South Dakota Historic Sites Survey for the city of Deadwood, and then also the 1996 photographic recordation of monuments in Mount Moriah Cemetery, which coincidentally is now online. And so if you were to go out, you would be able to look at the headstones of Wild Bill and the other 3,600 individuals that are in Mount Moriah Cemetery. Now, the city archives and their offshoot projects in digitization. So again, with what I do, I'm trying to be a good steward, and I'm always looking at the city of Deadwood and the historic preservation collections and trying to figure out what other collections and items that we want to make more accessible to the general public through digitization. Over the years, the one thing that really became apparent was the significance of genealogical records and their importance to Deadwood's history as part of public outreach. And so, whoops, I got ahead of myself, that's all right. So I began looking at the city's collections to determine what collections would provide the most amount of information for genealogical purposes. And while I was doing this, I looked for two primary criteria for digitizing these items. Number one, it was that the items that we were looking at to digitize and to make public had to help fill in the missing 1890 federal census records by providing names and dates and physical locations. And number two, I'm sorry for saying this, but number two, collections that had high sex appeal or items or individuals where they would want to spend more time looking at these items online. And, oh boy, I better hurry up. Okay, fast forward. So anyways, fast forward, what you're seeing right here is basically the Lawrence County Ledger Project. These are some of the ledgers that we have gone through. This isn't done overnight. We have partners working on this, as you can see down in the lower left-hand corner. As we move forward, that high sex appeal, things that we want to make available. This is something in 2022, we acquired a large collection, 1,000 minutes of raw video footage. And one of the things that we wanted to do is how do we get these out to the masses? In addition to that as well, we also had we had city employees and departments that also had video footage as well. What we came up with is what you're seeing here is our first generation of a motion picture genealogy. I'm going to jump in here real quick and we're going to see if we can get this to upload. And come in there, almost there, around the corner. There we go. Okay. And so what we're looking at is the aftermath of the 1962 flood. Basically, we're able to take this information, we bring it in from the digital files that we have, and we edit it down, and we're able to basically make this, show up and go from there. Thank you. I guess one other thing here. Go ahead. Escape out here. Just want to do this real quick. One more slide. Okay, and then I'll be done. Archives, archaeology, and historic preservation. Why it works. Well, I have this slide on here because really, as you can see, we're all in separate disciplines, archaeology, archives, and historic preservation, but they share common details. And without those details to help reconstruct our history, we're basically, we're all doing our separate thing. The big thing that I want to mention is funding. This cannot be done without spending money, and because of that, I'd like to thank the Historic Preservation and the City of Deadwood for making their archives an important part of Deadwood's history. Thank you, and I'll take questions at the end.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be part of this panel with Michele Christian and Mike Runge, and I appreciated the introduction. I think it might make you think I'm younger than I really am. I am a baby boomer. My first career was as an attorney with a law degree from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. I then transitioned to being a professional librarian, and I have been the archivist at Dakota Wesleyan University in Mitchell since November 2000. That is when the archivist position was created with federal appropriations funding that Dakota Wesleyan received to support the Senator George McGovern collection and the planning of the George and Eleanor McGovern Library. In the 23 years that I have worked as an archivist, I've learned that people often entertain fantasies about the materials in our archival collections and how they can be accessed. Before I dispel those fantasies, I'd like to provide just a brief overview of our archives. Dakota Wesleyan is a small private university with a population of just over 900 students. While comparable institutions often don't have archives, Dakota Wesleyan houses 2 archives and several special collections. The Dakota Wesleyan University archives contain the records that document the university's history. Prior to the construction of the McGovern Library in 2006, the university's historical records were housed in the Lane Library and other campus offices. With the construction of the McGovern Library, which has approximately 5,000 square feet of space dedicated to the archives, materials from those and other offices have been transferred to the archives for permanent storage in environmentally controlled spaces. The Senator George McGovern collection consists of personal and campaign materials, including approximately 10,000 photos that span George McGovern's life from 1922 when he was born to 2012 when he passed away. Much of the collection was donated to Dakota Wesleyan prior to my hiring in 2000, but additional materials were added in the years since. McGovern donated his political papers to Princeton University. Dakota Wesleyan also holds the political papers of the late Senator Francis H. Case, a Dakota Wesleyan graduate who represented South Dakota in Washington, D.C., as a congressman from 1937 to 1951, and then as a senator from 1951 to 1962 when he died unexpectedly. After Senator Case's death, his political papers were given to Dakota Wesleyan, his alma mater. In 1964, a retired archivist was hired to work with the papers and create a finding aid. Also in the archives is a collection of photos, papers, and books on South Dakota and regional history collected by the late Dakota Wesleyan history faculty member J. Leonard Genowan. Dakota Wesleyan acquired these materials in 1962. In 2007, Dakota Wesleyan University and the Dakotas Conference of the United Methodist Church entered into an agreement to house the archives of the Dakotas Conference in the Dakota Wesleyan Archives facility. Pursuant to the agreement, the Dakotas Conference pays Dakota Wesleyan half of the archivist's salary and benefits, plus $10,000 per year as rent for upkeep of the building. The collections in this archive include records of the current and predecessor conferences, as well as records from closed churches in North Dakota and South Dakota. And because of this agreement, half of my time is to be spent on Dakota's Conference Archives projects. As an historical note, the Dakotas Conference of the United Methodist Church is the present-day manifestation of the Dakota Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church, which founded Dakota Wesleyan in 1885. Accordingly, there are connections among both archives and the special collections because of this shared history. Because of the high demand for information from both archives, the archives is a busy place year-round. I am always juggling research requests with processing materials, working with my student worker and volunteers, and handling other duties as assigned. From my interactions with researchers and donors during the past 23 years, I have learned that people often entertain fantasies about our archives materials, how our archives function, and especially how our archives can be accessed. Here is a short list of the most common fantasies. Everything is digitized, mounted on the internet, and findable with a few keyword searches. Archives have everything about the subject in question and in one place. Archives have staff that are available 24/7 to help with anything and everything. And archives are permanent. But the realities that I encounter and have to navigate in our small archives include the following. Resources such as staff, hardware and equipment, software, space, time, and funding are limited. Accordingly, materials are digitized on demand. There is a cost in mounting and maintaining digitized material on internet platforms, and bills must be paid. Archives have the materials that have been saved, but they may be misidentified or misspelled or contain other errors that limit how easily they can be found. Archives can be decimated due to lack of funding and/or administrative decisions. As for archive staff, I'm it. I have been lucky to have an archive student worker position at various times through the years, but they are limited in the number of hours they are available to work. My current student worker works 1 hour a day, 5 days a week, and does outstanding work updating the finding aid to our McGovern collection. I'm also fortunate to have a few volunteers who help in the archives as their schedules allow. Additional federal appropriations funding that we received in 2008 for both our George McGovern and Francis Case collections enabled us to hire a project archivist for 3 years. They began digitizing McGovern and Case materials and adding them to the Digital Library of South Dakota, but the funding and that position ended in 2011. As the result of library staff changes in 2012, the cataloging librarian was able to digitize many of our Dakota Wesleyan yearbooks and add those to the Digital Library of South Dakota. But after they left in 2020, that position was not filled. Because of limited resources, I have one high-quality flatbed scanner that will scan up to ledger-sized materials. It was purchased with the 2008 federal appropriations funding. My first archive scanner, which I acquired in 2007 and was already several years old, was transformed into a large paperweight a few years ago when computer upgrades rendered it incapable of functioning. And we tried. There is a real cost to having some of our digitized material available in the Digital Library of South Dakota. A few years ago, a previous administrator considered not paying that bill while at the same time pushing digitization of the archives. The bottom line is that I don't have time to do everything that I'm expected to do, so I have to prioritize. For most of my years as archivist, research requests have been the top priority. That was the vision of the administrators who created the archivist position in 2000. Accordingly, I have handled thousands of research requests from on campus and around the world. Our archives materials have been used in books, articles, dissertations, films, news programming, building displays, and museum displays. An alternative approach, proposed briefly by former administrators, would be to make digitization the top priority, digitizing materials that haven't been requested and may never be. Only those researchers who could visit the archives in person would be helped, while others would be summarily helped or disregarded. They hired a consultant to autopsy the archives and me. Ultimately, she recommended that they hire a second full-time archivist. The bottom line is that the archives for Dakota Wesleyan and the Dakotas Conference is a busy place with limited resources, but no shortage of work. Research requests drive digitization. Just because something isn't findable on the internet doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I have saved thousands of scanned images and documents from all the archives collections that aren't in the Digital Library of South Dakota. The archives collections are available to researchers in person and via phone, email, and mail. I have keyword searchable finding aids for the processed collections and an Excel spreadsheet documenting the unprocessed materials. The archives will last as long as there are people willing to sustain them. You are invited to view our digitized materials in the Digital Library of South Dakota. Visitors to the archives at the McGovern Library on the Dakota Wesleyan University campus are always welcome. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions at the end of the panel. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Michele Christian. I am the Archivist and Special Collections Librarian at South Dakota State University. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. Oops. Hitting the wrong buttons. Over here. Sorry. There we go. So, today I'm going to talk about a couple different things. I'm going to talk about the collections at South Dakota State University, just a few of our highlights. I'm going to talk briefly about what it takes to put that history online, and I'm very briefly going to touch on some of the most I can't even think of the word right now, the most significant changes in archives since 2000. And there's been quite a few. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, sorry. That's the problem being short, so.
I have hearing aids.
Oh. So like I said, I'm going to talk about the significant changes in archives since 2000. So, oh man, anyway, sorry about that. One of the biggest changes was in standardization and automation. So in those ways, we've changed quite a bit. One of the biggest changes was the creation of encoded archival description. That came out slightly before 2000, and archives have been using that as a way of putting the materials online. And, oh, sorry about that. It's a standard for encoding finding aids for use in the online environment. So this is how people around the world can actually kind of find things, digitally, basically. It's a digital format. The other change was in 2004 when describing archives, a content standard was adopted by the Society of American Archivists, and that replaced archives, personal papers, and manuscripts, which was a standard created in 1983. DAX is better suited for the online environment. APPM was more connected to bibliographic catalogs, so it was better fitted for the old school descriptions. Along with the changes came the development of content management systems, and over the past 25 years, these systems have evolved into more complex tools, allowing archivists to better manage their collections and also to use the EAD and DAX to make the collections more widely available. Another big change that occurred in the past 25 years was how we process our collections. In 2005, Dennis Meisner and Mark Green proposed a new way of looking at processing. Realizing that backlogs were increasing, additional funding to handle this was never going to happen, and that collections were not being made available to researchers in a timely manner, they proposed to change this. They suggested that we look at doing minimal processing, making sure that the collections were preserved just enough, or arranged just enough, and described just enough for people to use them. This actually cut down a lot of backlogs in archives, allowing for people to see more materials than they've ever had, know that more materials are there than ever before. Another approach to processing collections was kind of on demand. As collections are asked for, archivists will go and get those prepared for the researcher at the time that they come in. So kind of like, yeah, archives on demand. The Century also saw an increase in making sure that archives are more accessible to different types of groups. For example, more and more children are encouraged to visit archives and learn about archives. Just last fall, SDSU hosted nearly 200 middle school children from Sioux Falls to attend National History Day Research Days. Some of them spent time in the archives, some spent time in the library. Librarians, archivists, and some historians helped these children find information to help them with their projects. Collections can now be located through many different ways. Through online search engines, national catalogs, through the content management systems, and any way we can make those materials more visible. All of this was driven by technology. And this is by far the biggest force behind the change. Again, collection management has evolved from paper indexes to general office databases and spreadsheets, and now to dedicated archival systems. Websites allow researchers from around the world to discover collections they've never seen or even knew existed. Another change is that archivists have been developing strategies to preserve born digital materials, working on ways to ensure that the usability of these materials go far into the future. One of the most visible changes that is continuing to grow and evolve is making actual documents available online. Archives has spent slightly more than the past 25 years making their rare materials available, putting history online for everyone. So what does it take to actually put that history online? Well, people. People are necessary. Like any job, it entails finding the right person to do that job and providing the necessary training for those people. So people can be trained in how to describe digital items using current standards and best practices, and to be trained on using equipment, some of which is highly technical. So for equipment, each archival item needs to be digitized using its format-specific equipment. Scanners and cameras can handle flat-ish items such as books, documents, photographs, negatives. For audio and video materials, we still have to use the old school players, the old audio cassette players, the video cassette players, and connect them through a multitude of things to get into the computer and digitize with specialized software. So these all take time and a lot of training. Planning is also, oops, and I'm not even going through here. Sorry, I am so sorry. Planning. So who will be responsible for what parts of the collection is a big part of that. So who's going to do the work? Since I have a couple people on my staff, I'm very lucky to have those people on my staff. We also have student staff as well. So we also have to make sure we get everybody trained. We have to make sure we figure out what kind of time commitment we're willing to spend on a project, what materials are going to be digitized, what kind of equipment we're going to use, what standards to follow, and how we're going to store the files for the short term and for the long term. The biggest part of any project is always funding, and this is a huge part. And it often depends. So if something is important to the institution, obviously that's usually part of what you do. It's your operating budget. However, sometimes you can be lucky and apply for grants or have a donor that is willing to help foot the bill for some of the projects. But all of it takes a lot of hard work to get any funding at all, especially in today's world where budgets are shrinking and it's just more and more difficult to do things. So this is the equipment that we use in the archive, some of it. All of this equipment that I'm showing here, we received either through a grant or from private donations. So it does take a lot of time to find funders to provide these types of materials so that we can do the work that we do. So, most of our material goes into the digital archives and so the Digital Library of South Dakota. We've been starting, since I started 10 years ago, we started out with 200 items. We now have probably hundreds, thousands of items there right now in the Digital Library of South Dakota. And that is a collaboration between the libraries of the Border Regions and universities and Dakota Wesleyan. It's powered by Content TM and uses Dublin Core metadata schema. Let's go this way. About 8 years ago, we started Open Prairie. Open Prairie is the university's institutional repository. It consists of SDSU publications and scholarly output of faculty and staff. I would say a lot of the material in Open Prairie right now are materials that we have digitized and made available in there. Items such as extension bulletins and newsletters and other reports done by the university. Our largest collection and our most prestigious collection is the Senator Thomas A. Daschle Congressional Papers. We received the bulk of the collection in 2005. It consists of approximately 3,000 linear feet of images, papers, artifacts, and other materials. We have digitized 12,000 items out of that, and it's an ongoing process with 3,000 linear feet. I don't think we will ever get through that collection, but we're just going to plug away at it every chance we can. The other collection, another prestigious collection, is our Ben Rifle collection. So about 5 years ago, we received a South Dakota State University Wokini Challenge grant to help us digitize the entire collection, which was wonderful. So we were able to get through all of that, all the material in the collection, with the help of Wokini scholars who learned how to digitize, describe, and work with archival materials. And one of the students in that project went on to get her library degree and is now a librarian, so that's pretty cool. Kind of made an impact, too. Let's see. Our biggest grant, we also got a grant for this project from the Recordings at Risk grant from the Council on Library and Information Resources. The grant program is made available by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. We were able to have approximately 300 audio recordings and films digitized from that collection. So that's a pretty major collection, and the films are pretty interesting. So yeah, it's a great collection, and it has a lot of information. There's even a recording of Eleanor Roosevelt when she came to the state and gave a speech. So, the South Dakota Poetry Society collection, we actually were lucky enough to get a South Dakota Humanities grant for this. We digitized the entire, all the issues of the South Dakota State Poetry Society's magazine, Past Petals. So approximately 19,000 pages of the magazine are available online. One of our most used collections is the George and Evelyn Norby collection. It consists all about Brookings and the surrounding area. This is another ongoing collection. Right now we have 3,000 images, and I'm sure we have another 10,000 to go, but as time and budgets allow, it's just ongoing. Oops, hit the wrong button. There we go. One of my favorite collections is the South Dakota cookbook collection. So about 7 or 8 years ago, Okay, so we started collecting cookbooks from around the state. Right now we have about a little over 500, and we have digitized about 100 of them. And again, that's one of those ongoing collections. And we have a lot of South Dakota State University materials online. So check us out at the Digital Library of South Dakota. Thank you.
This will be for all of you. What is being done with the original documents that are being digitized? And what's the long-term plan for having access and security for those?
This one? We say all originals. The only time an original document would be destroyed or discarded, as a general rule, would be if we had duplicates and it was in really bad shape. Digitizing does not result in disposing of originals.
Oh, I agree. Absolutely agree.
Yes, 100%, yeah.
That's why I answered, it was an easy question. I agree with you.
I'm going to take a bull by the horns. I'm going to speak as a former county commissioner with 20 years' experience. Not speaking for county commissioners, but as a former one. One of our, and a couple of our department heads said, once digitized, you can throw away the original. Also, that once digitized, it's carved in stone, not realizing that digitization degrades. Governmentally, things, they had A, B, and C records. The A records were, we needed them yesterday, but today will do. The B ones are, we need it next week, but by this year. And the C records, if we live long enough, we'll get around to it. Upgrade your computer systems regularly. The state of South Dakota bought a system, and all of a sudden, 10 years later, they decided they needed to upgrade it, but they never upgraded the 11th year, the 9th year, the 8th year, or the 7th year, so they had to get a group of people to come in from all over the United States and put each upgrade in and see that it functioned before they could put the next upgrade in. And they spent a lot of time and money, more than they should have if they would have done it originally. And I was always an advocate, buy the old technology that works so you can read stuff that there isn't a method of reading it today. Wire recordings are an example. All kinds of technology, CDs, get the equipment that reads that material and archive the reader so you can go back and get the old materials that you won't ever get to convert otherwise.
Thank you, Mr. Colby. That's very intuitive, yes. All the things you said is true. I guess a good example was Paul Horsted's presentation this morning. Okay, so the Illingworth negatives. So if we only scanned them once, why do we need the glass negatives? And you don't want to just, okay, I think enough said on that. But yes, I do agree with you. I think it's always interesting because reading old technologies, 3.5 by 5 floppies, CDs, DVDs, and actually zip drives. There was a period, it was I think 95 to about 2000, where this newfangled thing called a zip drive was the latest and greatest thing. And truth be told, going to historic preservation in the city of Deadwood saying, hey, I need to buy old technology that will actually have a USB port that I can plug in so we can convert this now into 21st century data. Yes, it's very important that we do that. And I would encourage saving on to those old laptops, especially the one that I have downstairs, the 2003 Gateway, that still has a 3.5 by 5 floppy and also the CD reader in there as well. So maintaining old technology in order to move it into the 21st century, most definitely.
Absolutely. Right now, we are working on a grant from the South Dakota Humanities Council to get some of our legacy equipment digitized, or fixed. So we're hoping to get some of our VCRs and other items prepped up and ready to roll so we can start digitizing the old video cassettes, especially the old U-matic ones, the big 3¼ inch ones. Yeah, so we're very lucky to have that grant so we can start working on those projects.
One more thing, just food for thought on that. So when we acquired that 1,000 minutes of Betacam SP and mini DV videos, one of the stipulations with getting that collection was that we received all of the old video equipment with the intention that, and let's face it, time changes. I mean, the last 25 years that we're all sitting here, think about how technology has evolved. We just mentioned that kind of laughingly here, but having that technology and maintaining it and keeping it, just like you were saying, is really important. That is a key component that makes an archives that much more diverse as well, and knowing how to use the material to get it off. Very, very important.
Lou Rabinow, the Sully County Historical Society. Our youngest daughter, Rebecca, is the archivist at University of Wisconsin Parkside in Kenosha. This is a conversation we have every time she comes home. There's not enough money. There's not enough grants. There's so much material. The Wisconsin legislature, in their wisdom, decided that there are too many state employees in Wisconsin. And they opted to ask for early retirements. And they gave a number to every campus. And they said, here's what's going to happen. We're either going to take early retirements, we're going to have people lose their jobs. So consequently, she is the only archivist at UW Parkside. And they're responsible for archiving all of the records from Kenosha and Racine counties in Wisconsin. So, if we can't digitize, if we can't remember the history, I think we all know that saying, those that don't remember history, that mistakes are made. So, no real comment. Good on you. Wishing we had more money for you. Maybe we should vote.
Ben Jones, just have a quick question. Michele, I had the pleasure of going through the National Archives several months ago, and I saw on the slide that you noted that the collection was ongoing. Is he still contributing to the archives, or is that?
Oh, yes.
He is, okay.
Yes. Every once in a while we
Receive further.
some materials.
Okay. And congrats on the Ben rifle thing. That's really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, quick question. So one of the big projects of archives is to try to document history. It's kind of as it's happening, take in new records. We're always trying to capture recent history as well as older history. Are there any collections that you've received recently that you're really excited about, or maybe a project, sorry, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, or maybe a project that you've had ongoing, like a documentation project that you'd like to talk about?
Every collection is important.
Yeah, I will second that. That is, every collection is important, and it's interesting when you get new materials in, because you're so excited about that, but then you turn around, something new comes in, and you're excited about that one, and then something else, and it's just kind of, everything kind of keeps going back until you go back and like, oh, we have this collection. So it's a little hard to keep up.
Not a new collection, but a revisiting of some of our oldest material. We have a new president who has been at Dakota Wesleyan, I think, a couple years by now, and he really embraces our history. And last year he implemented Founders Day, which is something that was celebrated a long time ago. But this year they are using the theme of the 1880s, which is when Dakota Wesleyan was founded. And so I'm getting a chance to go back to our roots at Dakota Wesleyan and digging out the photos and early campus newspaper, and I'm really enjoying that.
As I was saying, I had this in the presentation, but the 1,000 minutes of raw video footage that we have has been really exciting to go through that. Basically chronicles Deadwood's history for the last 25 years. What's really important, it's more recent history, but the important part is that, you know, when you're looking at these things, and it's the historic context of it, but it's also what's in there. You know, my thoughts and views might be completely different than, say, somebody from the Parks Department that's going in and trying to figure out where sprinklers are located within one of our city parks. And believe it or not, these collections that we have, these digital items, is just another tool that we have in our in our tool set that kind of helps us to you know, understand what it is. And so I think that's really important to have those and be able to utilize those as we go forward with it.
Okay, we have time for one more. This is dumb. But I read somewhere that, like, hey, I've got things that I've digitized, and so, like, I keep like a spare set on a thumb drive, and then I have stuff on, you know, those spinning drives that we used to have. I read somewhere that you're supposed to, like, take everything and make a copy of it every so and so many years, because no matter what you put it on, it's gonna. So what are the guidelines for that?
Laurie, you can handle that one.
That's the easy one, right?
Well, the best answer for that is it depends. It depends on when, it depends on what it's on, it depends on a lot of different things. So if your thumb drive, you know, maybe every year move it off of that, every 4 years. Don't leave it past 5. Make sure you're taking care of any of the material, looking at the equipment you have. Again, going back to the equipment, that is key. So if computers are no longer coming with CD, DVD drives. So if you have a lot of materials on CDs, DVDs, you have to migrate those off onto something else. It's just how it's going. You just have to keep going. Yes. It degrades. So with digital materials, I do actually talk about this. So I have a slide of a picture I took of my daughter when she was like 4 in her little ballet outfit. And the picture of her legs are over here and her body is here. So digital does degrade. And so you have to make sure that you're up on it and keeping multiple copies. Thank goodness I did keep multiple copies, so I do have a nice picture of her, but you just have to keep moving on and just keep checking your materials.
Yeah, and USB drives can last a long time, but my student worker was using one as a backup to save finding aid information, and it failed after just a few months. One thing about, you know, saving the original digital copies, whatever, I had an alum ask me if I had football footage from back when her husband had played football at Dakota Wesleyan, and no, I don't. Game film almost never gets saved. They tended to re-record over it. And the reason she asked me for it is she'd gotten a new kind of record player or whatever that she could use to make a digital copy of that VHS tape that she did have of her husband in one of the football games, winning or making a big point, whatever. And she'd made a digital copy and given it to him for a birthday or Christmas gift. Guess what? It didn't work, and she'd thrown away the VHS video. So you got to check your work.
Yeah.
All
right, we have to stay on schedule. These three will be here for the next week and a half. So if you have other questions, please reach out. Bob, I encourage you to reach out to them